guys, it's your boy Gsluke here with my DFS core picks for this week's Mexico Open, a brand new event on the PGA Tour schedule, also a new venue to go ahead and break down. So if you haven't already seen the course breakdown, go ahead and check it out. But in this video, we'll be going over my core plays or some of my highest owned plays in my GPP lineups for DFS contests this week. Of course, the goal here is to give you an idea of some of the foundational picks I'll be building a majority of my lineups around. Now, these aren't locks, people I'm going to have in every single lineup, but in terms of leverage to the field, I'm looking at least 25, maybe even 40 to 50% ownership on all of these plays. They're people that model very well for this course, have familiarity with it in one circumstance, and in general are guys that I'm the most confident in for this golf tournament. So in terms of our picks last week, our core picks were hit or miss. We had guys like Sam Burns and Horschel go off. I mean, Scotty Scheffler and Ryan Palmer, that was just about an average play. A few guys actually missed the cut, which isn't a surprise for an extremely volatile event, but we ended up having a pretty solid week of DFS. I'll put my highest scoring lineup on the screen there. You can see it won just over $200, which isn't all that bad. I had 4 or 5 lineups finish in the top 500 of the GPP. That was the large $5 GPP, the $50,000 to first contest with 71,000 entries. So given that I only put in 75 entries this week, I'll take that. We ended up making 1.7x our entries, which isn't going to be anything massive, right? It's not anything to really brag about, but certainly better than most, and enough to carry on into this weekend back to a normal format. So excited to get into it. Again, like I said, a golf course that not many people know about, so should be an edge. A lot that we can do with the research this week to leverage against the field. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it with our core picks here for this week. All right, guys, on the screen, you can see my projections for this week. And of course, if you're looking for direct access to these, check out my Patreon page. Just $8 for the month. You get direct access to them. And of course, just a great deal right there. I always update with ownership, get access to the Discord server to ask me any questions, interact with the rest of the community. So definitely recommend you go ahead and check it out. But plug aside, let's go ahead and talk about this golf course and some of the key stats I'm looking at, which up top, you can see it's a focus on the ball striking stats. Shots gained off the tee, shots gained approach. Also a little bit of a mixture of some of the scoring stats, including birdie or better percentage, par 3 scoring, par 5 scoring, just a really typical profile. Now, I guess the one thing to note here is the de-emphasis that is on the short game. You can see shots gained putting just there at 10.5%, and this is a paspalum surface from tee to green, so no matter where these players will be hitting, they'll be hitting off of paspalum, and of course, shots gained around the green also de-emphasized. Now, the reason for that is first off, these greens run slow. Paspalum is a sticky surface. I'm extremely familiar with this surface because my home course down here in Florida has paspalum. It's very easy to hit off of when you're in the fairway, particularly with some of those short irons. You can apply a ton of spin to them. You can also take a lot of spin off of them, and if you're used to that type of grass, you're going to have a huge advantage because it is a little bit of a unique trait. And around the green, you also get that same effect. It's extremely easy to apply spin to the golf ball, which means that even if you short side yourself, a lot of times you're not out of it, particularly if you're one of those players that uses the bounce of the golf club. And for as much crap as I give Patrick Reed, now he's not going to be a core pick here, don't worry guys. He's going to be great this week getting up and down because he's a master of using the bounce of the golf club. And on paspalum, that is the name of the game. I can just tell you from experience, that is how you get the job done. You can apply an incredible amount of spin to the golf ball. So there is a little bit of a de-emphasis there because it is so easy to get up and down. The putting also de-emphasized because of the speed of the greens. You're going to see some of the, let's say, more shaky short game players have some success this week. 2 years ago, when Victor Hovland won the Mayakoba Classic, I also took down a GPP that week because that was the main narrative I went with. Again, I'm very familiar with paspalum greens, also with hitting paspalum in fairways, so I knew that would be the effect. And that week, nobody knew how to play that golf course. It was a new golf course on Torre El Camaleon, something that we really hadn't been all that familiar with, especially from the shots gained perspective. Of course, being overseas, we don't have access to that, and it paid off in a huge way for me in DFS. So that's the same type of modeling I'm going with going forward. I've had a lot of success at Corrales using it. Same thing with the Puerto Rico Open. Just the surface type in general tends to play towards players that play with an open face around the green and some of the more shaky putters or just more aggressive putters in general. So not a surprise to see that Jon Rahm is my number one play this week. He's pretty much unavoidable up top at $11,300. First off, this is a extremely weak field with Daniel Berger withdrawing. There is nobody else in the 10K range that I really have any type of confidence in. So if we take a look at the shots gained metrics, they're really going to speak for themselves here. I mean, Jon Rahm just gaining a ton of strokes off the tee, gaining a ton of strokes on approach. Not really surprising there at all, gaining close to 1.5 strokes per round. Now, the short game, a little bit more surprising, right? He's losing around the green, losing a little bit more significantly with the putter. Now, the one thing of hope for Jon Rahm has actually been his success on the past pull-up surface for his career, gaining 0.41 shots gained putting per round when he's been on this surface, which makes sense. He's an extremely aggressive putter, and like I said before, the more shaky putters tend to have a lot of success here. Just think of Emiliano Grillo. I mean, even Victor Hovland from time to time, he certainly gets the ball to the hole most of the time, but a lot of times he's just a little bit off with the read. And it just, for whatever reason, these greens tend to make that a little bit easier. And for guys like Jon Rahm, where that's the only thing holding him back, again, gaining over a stroke per round off the tee, still gaining with the approach play. And over the last 50 measured rounds, you can see that same type of profile holds up. If he can return to being a positive with the flat stick, it's going to have an absolutely monster week. All right, after Jon Rahm, we're going to be taking a look at Gary Woodland as my second man in at $9,900. And very similarly to a Jon Rahm, this is a ball striking first type of player. Extremely long off the tee, a little bit less accurate than somebody like Jon Rahm, but at this golf course specifically where we have extremely wide landing areas, greens and fairways that are larger than a lot of aircraft carriers, not going to be a problem for somebody that sprays it. Really just on holes where he has water or places that can get him into trouble, just has to play smart, right? Has to play away from the trouble, understand where to bail out, and if he does so this week, should be able to lean into his skill set, which makes him a top 3 player in the field according to my total model ranking. We take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, which for a Gary Woodland have been some of the best golf we've seen from him for quite some time. In fact, probably for at least the last year, maybe even 2 years on tour, where he's gaining close to 0.8 of a stroke per round with the approach play. Of course, that is his strong suit. When he's playing his best, he's putting himself in position to score in almost every single hole. Now, the off the tee play is usually also an extremely solid part of his game. Usually he gains a lot more significantly off the tee, but of course, some of that accuracy off the tee has kind of held him back of late. He's lost a lot of penalty strokes, put himself in the water, but if he's, again, just strategic about it here, is a little bit careful on the holes where it can come into play, I expect him to have relatively smooth sailing because around the green, you can see he's a gainer to the field, always good at getting up and down. Also somebody who's not afraid at all to use the bounce of the golf club, hit a lot of flop shots, and also a gainer with the putter, which can be a little bit streaky with a Gary Woodland, but that's what we're looking for in these large field contests. Somebody who can go out there, be streaky with the putter, and of course go out there and gain in bunches. If we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, it's not quite as favorable for a Gary Woodland. You can see he's still right around neutral off the tee approach, not quite as significant, but still gaining around the green and with the putter. So we've slowly but surely seen him improving over the time, right? Slightly a bigger gainer off the tee, obviously a much larger gainer on approach. That's why we've seen so many more consistent finishes from Gary Woodland. But even the around the green play in the putter has gone better. So I love the recent form we've seen. If we take a look at his finishes, outside of the missed cut at the Masters, 8th place at Valero, also during the Florida swing, finished in the top 5 at the Honda Classic, a few other good finishes down in that stretch of golf. Just in general, starting to look like the Gary Woodland of old. And if you can get back to that type of skill set, this is the perfect type of venue for his skill set. So certainly going to have him in plenty of my lineups this week. All right, and now for our bread and butter pick, somebody who we're kind of deviating from the stats for is going to be Carlos Ortiz, a hometown guy that is going to have a ton of support out there. But most importantly, he's sponsored by Vidanta, who, of course, this is the resort that is hosting this golf tournament, and he has a ton of experience playing this venue. And even more than that, he's also, from a historical perspective, right, just thinking about his skill set in general, should be a good fit here. So let's first start off with the sponsorship. He's sponsored by Vidanta. You'll see that on his hat, and on social media this week, you can tell that he's already at the property. I've also seen him at the property and a lot of his social media things in the past. In fact, went back on Instagram just to make sure, and up there in the location tab on a lot of his posts, when it looks like it's in a tropical place, it has Vidanta at it. So I would assume this is a golf course that he is extremely familiar with, because it is by far the most difficult of all the golf courses there. If you're going to be a PGA Tour pro, going to be somebody out there trying to practice, get better, sharpen your game in the off season, you're going to try and play the most difficult golf course. So I would assume that Carlos, again, because his game fits it to start with, is already somebody I had my eyes on, that's going to give him a huge boost here, especially considering how weak this range is. I mean, Sahith Theegala, also not the best model play, and of course he doesn't have experience here. Aaron Rai, a consistent play, but I worry about his top end upside. And then towards the bottom of the 8K range, guys like Lanto Griffin, who haven't looked very good of late. Taylor Moore, who looked solid at the Zurich Classic, but outside of that, hasn't really splashed at all. Carlos Ortiz, I understand he's been in some of the worst recent form we've seen from him in quite some time. I'm willing to overlook that, especially considering, how weak the options are around him. Just in terms of that recent form, to give you an idea of why there is some hesitation around the play. Missed the cut at the RBC Heritage. Before that, during the Florida Swing, a few other missed cuts as well. If you take a look at the shots gained metrics, they also are extremely ugly here. So first and foremost, he's losing in every category but putting around the green. That is his worst, or at least has been his worst shots gained metric over the last 24 measured rounds. Shouldn't matter that much this week. Like I said, it's Paspalum, and because he grew up on Paspalum, of course he's from Mexico, a lot of the golf courses he was playing, in this area during the offseason are Paspalum. I would expect him to have a much better week around the green. With the approach play, the off the tee play, it's been right around a neutral. We know he's a relatively long player, so when I was talking about skill set fit, he's a bomber off the tee. He's much longer than people give him credit for. Hits it out there in the 310 to 315 range. On approach, he's extremely inconsistent, and you can see even though he's been in, again, one of the worst stretches admittedly he's had in quite some time, he's still right around a neutral player on approach. So he hits some really good shots from time to time, just has to clean it up. And what better place than a place he's extremely familiar with, a sponsor on his hat, right? It's his main sponsor at this point. I'm expecting a huge rebound here. And if he's able to do so, get some of that local momentum behind him, a lot of that support that I'm sure he's going to have out there, could very well be a solid week for him. And at $8,600, it's not like he has to go out there and win this week to end up being a ceiling type play for us. If he goes out there, ends up finishing in the top 15, top 10 ideally, that is going to be more than enough. So I like his upside. I like his chances to go out there and end up being a solid play in DFS, even despite not being in the best recent form, to say the least. Next up for our value pick at $7,800, and this is going to be an extremely chalky value pick this week. It's going to be Austin Smotherman at $7,800. In terms of the modeling, you can see he's number 4 in the field for me, which at $7,800 is just crazy value, but it's well warranted. I mean, just the ball striking for the kid ever since he's came on the tour has really made him stand out. It's why he's been one of the most consistent rookies that we've had in this rookie class, carrying himself around on approach where he's gaining over half a stroke per round. Off the tee, he absolutely blisters it out there, one of the longer rookies that we've had this season. And putting, you can see he's a gainer in that category. So really the only thing that holds him back is that around the green play. And like I mentioned before, greens with not that much undulation tend to be running slow on Paspalum and super easy to get up and down. So that one bugaboo for him might not be that much of an issue here. And with the ball striking numbers, with the putting numbers that we've seen of late, really the sky is the ceiling for this kid. Just absolutely expect him to go out there, not only make the cut this week, which he's been doing for a lot of the recent tournaments. You can see, of course, last week didn't make the cut in the team format, which we could certainly give a guy a pass for. He's playing with Harry Higgs, who can be a little bit volatile. Made the cut at Valero. Corrales missed the cut. Now, that's a really good comp course that is slightly concerning. So maybe that keeps his ownership lower than it should be. But considering the longer-term sample size that we have, it's a ton of made cuts and a ton of really solid tournaments with the ball striking. And this isn't a venue where he should really play himself out of it around the green. So absolutely love his chances here. And again, I expect him to be relatively chalky. I already know that here on a Monday. As the week goes on, he might even get more and more chalky as we get closer to lock. But still somebody I'm going to be on because he's just a perfect play for this course. Next up, we have our diamond in the rough. So towards the bottom of the 7K range, somebody I have my eyes on as a little bit of value, a little bit of potential to actually go out there and pop is Adam Svensson at $7,300. So very similar to an Austin Smotherman, a ball striker, one of these rookies who's really impressed us with those type of categories. Off the tee on approach. That's why he's number 7 in the field in terms of his total model ranking. Over the last 24 measured rounds, he hasn't had any really flashy performances, but you can see he's gaining in every category we care about, right? Off the tee, gaining, not anything significantly, but still gaining there. Gaining significantly on approach, close to half a stroke per round, similar to somebody like an Austin Smotherman. Gaining around the green, although it's just slightly, right, 0.05 shots gained per round. The putter is a negative, which is obviously not ideal. That's the difference, between a Smotherman and an Adam Svensson, is that one of them has been a gainer with the putter and one of them is a loser. Of course, there's a price difference there. Adam Svensson likely to be about half as owned as somebody like an Austin Smotherman, so you're getting a little bit of a trade-off in both categories. If we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, so trying to give him a little bit of a bigger sample size here, you can see the ball striking remains, right? Still gaining significantly on approach. Off the tee, it's closer to neutral rather than being a gainer, so it tends to regress there a little bit, but the short game always going to be a problem. But like we mentioned before, the short game stats aren't going to really be something that's holding these players back. I'm really more looking for the ball striking, the ability to take it to a 15 to 25 under par. And considering a lot of the other players around him, first off, are in some pretty dreadful recent form. If you go over here to the last 24 measured rounds, you can see first off RCB, we don't even have recent form stats for, but a lot of guys that are losing a lot of red across the board. The guys below him get even uglier. A lot of them aren't gaining. Adam Svensson gaining across the two most important categories that we're looking for. And again, very significantly in the most important category, regardless of golf course on tour. So I like his upside. I definitely like him in the outright betting market as well. Somebody that I hit this morning as soon as the lines ended up dropping, and somebody that I have my eyes on for DFS lineups as well. And now lastly, for our flyer pick, down here at $7,000. I was talking crap about him last week. I was giving him crap for being, one of the worst recent form players that we've seen. And at the Zurich Classic, we finally saw Matt Wallace turning around. Now, he took a break. He stopped playing golf for a month and a half. On social media, I follow him. He mentioned about having to get back into it. He had a long way to come back. He was going to work really hard to get back. And I was taking a wait-and-see approach, right? I just needed to see some type of recent form, and it's not like he really exploded there at the Zurich Classic, of course, alongside Sam Horsfield. But they went out there and finished pretty respectively, made the cut, were in contention there early on a Sunday, and he played pretty darn well. And it was really with the approach play. When they were going out there scoring it was Sam Horsfield making the putts, and it was Matt Wallace doing it with the ball striking. They had some monster drives. Of course, he's one of the longer players on tour. He hits it out there 310, 315, much like a lot of the other players that we have identified. And with the approach play, that's usually something that he leans into, right? From tee to green, Matt Wallace is usually one of the better players on tour. The one real issue that he always has is with the putter. And at this golf course, we've already outlined how Paspalum can kind of cure that issue. He's an aggressive putter on these Paspalum greens. I could see him having a little bit of success. And if you tap into that tee to green play, we know he has in him. I mean, historically, this guy just an absolute striper of the golf ball. He really looks like he had that there at the Zurich Classic. At $7,000, he is criminally underpriced. I mean, this guy could be $9,500, $10,000 on this slate if he's really playing like he was historically. I mean, that's the type of player that he is, right? He was a top 50 player in the world for a long time there, top 100 for an even longer time. That's how consistent he was, especially over there on the European Tour. So, again, just comparing him to a lot of his peers, the recent form metrics on a lot of them look a lot better because they've been more consistent. But the longer-term sample size you give them, again, if we look at like the last year, or even the last 2 years of shots gained metrics, is where Matt Wallace becomes a top 10 or even top 15 player in this field. So because we have that light at the end of the tunnel from what we saw at the Zurich Classic, he is somebody I'm willing to buy back in on. Now, one thing I'll say, he is a core pick, right? But he is a relatively risky core pick. So he's not somebody like the other 4 or 5 picks I had here. I'd be playing in the 25 to 30% range, probably closer to 15 to 20% range. So just keep that in mind there with the Matt Wallace. There is a little bit of inherent risk there, even though we did see him kind of rebound last week. But the upside is certainly there as well. That's all I've got here for the core picks. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and let me know down in the comments who you've got winning this week. For me, it's going to have to be Jon Rahm up top. Obviously, the real clear choice. I think everyone's taking him this week. But if we have to be a little bit more creative, maybe take a sleeper pick to win, going to go with Carlos Ortiz. I like his familiarity, the fact that he's sponsored by Vidanta. Also, of course, his skill set fit. Just like the fact that he's long off the tee, can be extremely streaky with the approach play, and maybe finds some of that magic on these past Palm greens. But go ahead and let me know who you've got down below. Of course, look forward to all of the DFS content to come. We'll have value picks dropping later tonight, also fades and sleepers dropping at some point. Of course, if you're looking for access to the spreadsheets, all of the data to come, including ownership projections, make sure to go and check out the Patreon like I said before. If you haven't already subscribed, I also recommend you go ahead and do that. That way you don't miss any of that content I was talking about, including the DFS live stream that will be Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I appreciate you guys. Until next time, best of luck with all of your DFS lineups, any outright bets that you're placing for this week, and let's get this cash.